smell of glazed ham and sweet potato casserole had been filling my house since 6 in the morning. My daughter-in-law had taken over the kitchen the way she took over everything else, completely without asking, rearranging my cabinets so she could find things faster. I'd stopped saying anything about it months ago. It wasn't worth the look she gave me. My son's birthday fell on a Saturday that year, the last weekend of October. He turned 34. I remember thinking, standing in the doorway of my own kitchen, watching her direct the catering staff she'd hired without telling me, that I could remember the exact weight of him when the nurse first put him in my arms. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He had his mother's nose. She'd been gone 4 years by then. Their friends started arriving around 3. I knew maybe 2 of them. The rest were couples from their neighborhood association, people my son had met through his work at the financial firm, women my daughter-in-law had collected the way some people collect ceramic figurines. I shook hands. I smiled. I went to refill my glass and came back to find someone had taken my chair. I found a spot near the fireplace, off to the side. I was fine there. I'm not a man who needs to be the center of anything. It was around 7 when it happened. My daughter-in-law came up behind me while I was talking to one of my son's college friends. A good kid named Marcus, I think, who remembered me from graduation weekend. She touched my elbow lightly, the way you touch someone when you want them to step aside, and lean close enough that only I could hear. "You know this is really more of a friends thing," she said. Her voice was pleasant. That was the part that stayed with me. How pleasant it was. "Next year, we'll do something separate with you. Just the 3 of us, more your speed." I looked at her. She smiled and moved back toward her guests. I stood there for a moment. Marcus was saying something about a project he was working on, and I answered him, I think, but I couldn't tell you what either of us said. I was doing the math. I was thinking about the amount I had transferred to their joint account 11 days earlier for the catering deposit she'd mentioned needing. I was thinking about the mortgage on this house, my house, with my name on the deed, that I had been paying in full every month for 3 years because they'd asked me to cover it while they got on their feet. I was thinking about the new truck sitting in my driveway that I'd co-signed for because my son's credit had taken a hit after the investment that didn't work out. More your speed. I didn't say anything that night. I refreshed my drink. I ate some of the glazed ham. I talked to Marcus for another 20 minutes and genuinely enjoyed it. I drove home to my other house, the smaller one I'd moved into after my wife passed, and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time in the quiet. I want to be honest about something. My wife, June, she was the one who always said I was too easy. Not weak, she'd say, just too easy. She'd grown up with a father who held things close to the chest, and she'd spent her whole adult life watching me do the opposite. Always willing to help, always saying yes, always finding a way to make things work for other people. She loved that about me, and it drove her crazy in equal measure. After she died, I think I got worse about it. Not because I was lonely, though people assumed that. More because the house felt too quiet and writing checks felt like doing something. Like I was still part of the machinery of my son's life, even when I wasn't sure he wanted me there. He married Brenda 3 years after June passed. The wedding was beautiful. I paid for most of it. They came to me 6 months later with the house situation. They'd found a place, it was perfect, but the timing on the mortgage was tricky, with his firm transitioning its bonus structure. Could I cover the mortgage for a year? Maybe 18 months while they stabilized? I said yes. 18 months became 3 years. I want you to understand something about Brenda. She was not a stupid woman. She was smart and organized, and she had a way of making everything sound reasonable in the moment. The catering deposit made sense when she explained it. The furniture for the guest room made sense. The trip to Scottsdale for their anniversary that I'd helped fund. She'd framed it as a mental health necessity after my son's rough quarter at work. And I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was understanding what was actually happening. The Sunday after the party, my son called. He asked how I'd enjoyed myself. I said it was a nice evening. He said Brenda thought I'd seemed quieter than usual, and he hoped I wasn't coming down with something. I said I was fine. I did not tell him what she'd said to me. I wanted to think first. I spent the next 2 weeks thinking. I pulled up my bank statements going back 3 years. Not because I didn't know what I'd been giving them. I knew exactly what I'd been giving them, but because I needed to see it laid out. Total, accumulated, irrefutable. By the time I finished adding it up, I had a number that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the ceiling for a full minute. $260,000 over 3 years. Give or take, mortgage payments, the catering deposit, the truck cosign, furniture, the Scottsdale trip, various smaller amounts for things that had always been framed as temporary. They were both employed. My son made a solid salary. Brenda worked in pharmaceutical sales and made more than he did in good quarters. They were not broke. They were not struggling. The money had simply become an expectation, a baseline, something that would keep coming, the way a river keeps flowing, not because anyone was particularly grateful for it, but because it had always been there. I am not a man who acts out of anger. I want to be clear about that. What I decided to do, I decided slowly and carefully, over those 2 weeks, in the kitchen of the quiet house where my wife and I had raised our son. I thought about what June would have said. I thought about what June would have said. I thought about what I actually wanted my life to look like. I thought about the fact that I was 61 years old, still healthy, still working part-time as a consultant, and that I had spent 3 years making myself smaller and more peripheral in my own life while funding someone else's. The first thing I did was call my attorney, not to do anything dramatic, just to understand my position. The house was mine, my name, my deed, purchased before my son was born. The truck cosign was a liability I needed to address. The mortgage payments I'd been making were gifts, not loans, which meant legally they were gone, but also meant no one could come after me for stopping them. My attorney, a man I've known for 20 years named Vin, listened to everything I said and then said, "You could have called me 2 years ago." I said I knew that. Then I called my accountant. I needed to understand the tax implications of some changes I was considering, and I needed to make sure my estate documents reflected my current wishes. June and I had done our wills together, and I hadn't updated mine since she passed. That needed to change regardless. My son was still the primary beneficiary of the estate, but I had some thoughts about structures, trusts, conditions, timing that I wanted to explore. Vin connected me with an estate attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. We had 2 meetings over the next 3 weeks. I want to pause here and say something important. None of this was about punishment. I am his father. That doesn't stop. But there is a difference between being someone's father and being someone's financial resource. And somewhere over the past 3 years, I had allowed those 2 things to become the same thing that needed to stop being the same thing. I did not call my son. I did not confront Brenda. I did not write a letter or send an email or have a conversation at a family dinner designed to air grievances. I have seen the way those conversations go. They go badly. The person who brings receipts gets painted as the villain. The person who spent the money gets to cry about being ambushed. Instead, I waited until the 1st of the month. That was the day the mortgage payment was due. For 3 years, I had set up an automatic transfer, always on time, always the full amount, nothing dramatic about it. This time, I logged into my banking app on a Thursday evening, made myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and canceled it. It took about 45 seconds. I also sent an email, not a call, an email, documented to the dealership where I'd co-signed the truck, alerting them to my intention to refinance my liability off the loan and explaining my son would need to arrange his own financing or trade down. I'd already spoken to someone there about the process. Then I closed my laptop and watched the rest of the baseball game I'd had on in the background. 3 days later, my son called. He did not sound like himself. He sounded the way he used to sound in high school when something had gone wrong that he didn't know how to explain. A little tight, a little careful. "Dad," he said. "Hey, so I got a notice from the bank. I said I expected he had." There was a pause. "Did something happen with the transfer?" I said, "No, nothing had happened with the transfer. I had canceled it." Another pause, longer. "Canceled it?" I said, "Yes." "Okay." He exhaled slowly. "Can I ask why?" I thought about the party. I thought about her voice, pleasant and quiet, telling me this was more of a friend's thing. I thought about $260,000 and 3 years of telling myself it was fine, it was temporary, they were adjusting. I said, "I think it's time for you two to handle your own finances." I should have said so a while ago. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Brenda's been calling the mortgage servicer. They're saying the account's delinquent." I said I understood. "Dad, you both have good jobs," I said. "You can handle this. I have faith in that." He asked if something was wrong. He asked if I was angry. He asked, and this was the one that hit me somewhere I wasn't expecting. He asked if he'd done something. I told him we could talk in person if he wanted. I suggested Saturday lunch, my choice of restaurant, just the 2 of us. He said yes. He said he'd be there. He did not bring Brenda. We sat across from each other at a diner I've been going to for 20 years, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that comes in a ceramic mug that never quite gets washed all the way. My son looked like he hadn't slept well. He ordered a burger he mostly didn't eat. I told him what his wife had said to me at the party. I told it to him the same way she'd said it to me, plainly, without drama, the way you tell someone a fact. He stared at the table. For a long time, he just stared at the table. She didn't mean it like that, he started. I waited. He stopped. I waited. He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup, put it back down. I don't know, he said finally. I don't know what she meant. I told him I did. I told him I thought he probably did too, if he was honest with himself. We talked for almost 2 hours. I told him I loved him. I told him I had always loved him, and that was exactly why I was sitting across from him in this diner instead of letting another year go by. I told him that I didn't need him to choose between his wife and his father. That wasn't what this was, but I was no longer willing to fund a situation in which I was treated as an inconvenience, and if he thought about it clearly and honestly, I believed he would understand that. He cried a little. My son is not someone who cries easily. It surprised me. He said he was sorry. He said he knew things had drifted in a direction he hadn't intended. He said he missed, and here he stopped for a second, looking for the word. He said he missed when it felt like family. I said I missed that too. He called me 3 times over the next 2 weeks. Not about the mortgage, just to talk. About the Cubs, about a documentary he'd been watching, about a memory he had from when we used to drive out to his grandmother's house in Indiana and stop at the same gas station every time for those particular peanut butter crackers they don't seem to make anymore. We talked the way we used to talk, the way we hadn't in years. Brenda called me once. She was polished about it, I'll give her that. She framed it as a conversation between 2 adults who both cared about my son. She said she hoped I understood that the financial arrangement had always been a temporary solution, and she was sorry if there had been any miscommunication. She said she hoped we could find a way forward as a family. I let her finish. Then, I said I appreciated her calling. I said I agreed that we should find a way forward. I said I hoped she and my son would have the mortgage refinanced in their own names within 60 days, and that I'd appreciate getting my name off the truck cosign as soon as they were able to arrange it, and that I was looking forward to having the 3 of us sit down together sometime soon. She said she'd look into the refinancing. I said I was glad to hear it. We ended the call politely. I don't know what she said to my son afterward. I didn't ask. That was between them. Vin and I finalized my updated estate documents 6 weeks after that diner lunch. My son is still my primary beneficiary. He always will be. But there are structures in place now, a trust with conditions, a trustee who isn't a family member, timelines that ensure the assets are used for what I intend them for. It's nothing punitive. It's just careful. It's what I should have done when I first updated my will after June died, but I'd been in the fog of grief and I hadn't thought clearly about it. I think about her a lot when I think about this whole situation. Not because I need her guidance. I figured this one out on my own. But because I can hear her laughing. Not mean laughter. The fond kind, the kind that said, finally. The kind that said, I was wondering how long it would take you. It took me 3 years and a woman's pleasant voice at a birthday party telling me I was more of a guest than a father in my own home. I don't regret the money. I want to be honest about that too. Not all of it. In the beginning, I was helping my son through a real transition, and I would do it again. The regret is the drift, the way I let temporary become permanent, let assumption become expectation, let myself get smaller and quieter every time something didn't feel right, rather than saying the thing out loud. That's the part I'm still working on. The mortgage got refinanced 43 days later. My son handled it. He called me when it was done, matter of fact, and I said good, and then we talked about the documentary again for another half hour. The truck cosign took a little longer, but that got resolved too. I haven't been back to that house for one of their parties. My son and I have lunch, just the 2 of us, most Saturdays now. Sometimes I drive over there for Sunday dinner, and the 3 of us sit around the table, and it is not perfect, and it is not what I had before June died, but it is something, it is real. He passes me the bread without being asked. He looks me in the eye. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. I'm 61 years old, and I live in a quiet house, and I have my work, and I have my son, and I have the memory of a woman who knew me better than I knew myself, and who would have fixed all of this a lot faster than I did. I'm learning. I'm still learning. But I canceled that transfer, and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and that, I think, was the beginning of something. I've been turning this over in my mind for a long time now. Not with bitterness. I want to be clear about that. But with the kind of slow, honest attention you can only give something after the dust is settled and you're not angry anymore. What happened with Brenda and my son didn't come out of nowhere. I know that. I was part of how it got built. Every time I transferred money without a conversation, every time I noticed something that felt wrong and chose the quiet over the honest, I was adding a brick to a wall that eventually became the thing I had to knock down myself. That's not self-pity. That's just how cause and consequence works in real life. In real families, between real people who love each other imperfectly. There's something I've come to believe, and it took me 61 years and one quiet evening canceling a bank transfer to really understand it. The most important decisions you make aren't the big dramatic ones. They're the small ones you keep deferring. The conversation you keep not having. The boundary you keep moving back one more inch because this month is complicated, because the timing isn't right, because you don't want to be the one who made things hard. I moved that line back so many times I eventually couldn't find where it had started. Wisdom, real wisdom, isn't knowing the right thing in theory. It's knowing it in the moment when doing it costs you something. When my son called and asked if he'd done something wrong, I had a choice. I could have smoothed it over. I could have said nothing happened. The transfer was a mistake. We're fine. It would have been easier in that minute. It would have cost me everything over the next decade. I chose the harder thing, and I chose it clearly. And that clarity, not the anger, not the hurt, that's what made the difference. My wife June used to say that the people who love you most will sometimes need you to disappoint them. Not to be cruel, not to win, but because protecting someone from every consequence of their choices isn't love. It's a slow way of telling them you don't believe they're capable of more. I believed my son was capable of more. I still do. That Saturday lunch at the diner, watching him stare at the table and finally say the honest thing, that was him being capable of more. I had to stop making it easy for him not to be. The money is gone. I accepted that. What came back instead was my son calling me on a random Tuesday to talk about a documentary, passing me the bread without being asked, looking me in the eye. You can't put a dollar figure on that. You also can't get it by writing checks and staying quiet about everything else. I think about what I want the end of my life to look like. Not the finances, not the estate documents. Though those matter, and I'm glad they're in order. I mean the texture of it. The actual days. I want my son in them. I want him there because he wants to be, not because I've made myself so financially necessary that leaving would cost him something. That distinction matters more to me than anything. I'm still learning how to hold the line without holding a grudge. Still learning the difference between generosity and erosion. Still learning at 61 that the quietest decisions, a canceled transfer, a requested lunch, an honest sentence across a laminate table, are sometimes the bravest things a person can do.